Employers need highly qualified and diverse talent to grow. Unmuddle is a marketplace to help you with workforce and upskill needs. To learn more, go to unmuddle.com/employers. That's UNMUDL.com/employers. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. When this episode, who am I? I forget to say my name. My name is Joe Salustio, as you probably well know now after listening to this 350 or 60 times. Probably you haven't listened that many times, but that's okay. That's why you can go to the edupexperience.com website and you can choose what you want to listen to, because we've categorized all of our episodes and put them in little buckets, like community college presidents or community colleges in general. We have private colleges, public colleges. We have membership and membership association leaders that you could listen to. You can listen to our Latino and Latina series. You can listen to Black American leaders. You can listen to anything that you want if you go to our website. I am right now, as I record this, I'm in Denver, Colorado. Home, I say home because I spent 17 years here for the holidays with my family. In the middle of, I've, as you know, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I had resigned from my position at Claremont Lincoln University, and I'm taking on a new gig at Lindenwood University as a senior vice president of Lindenwood Global to move Lindenwood to its next phase in online growth and tapping into the adult market. So I'm really excited about that, which leads me to why I'm excited about my guest today, because he covers higher education in a way that's actually pretty unique. We haven't had anybody from this publication on the podcast before, a journalist, and he knows a lot. Let's just put it that way. So here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He is one cool gentleman, and I met him in Doha. Ladies and gentlemen, you have read his work before if you follow higher ed. Here he is. Derek Newton. He's contributing writer at Forbes. Derek, what's going on?
Great to be here. I love that introduction. I got to get some of those sound effects just to carry around with me, so I feel great.
Well, it's like, can you imagine every time you go in, you ask somebody for an interview? Derek Newton, there he is.
I love it. That I should just play that every time I go into or out of any room.
That'll just make it so much easier. First of all, tell our audience how we met and why it's such a unique experience.
Well, we have I don't know if it's a great story, but it's an interesting story. It was my privilege to meet you in, as you mentioned, Doha, Qatar. We were there for the WISE conference, which is part of the Qatar Foundation. Really, really, in my view, an outstanding venue, outstanding conference. Really important too in terms of the fabric and texture of global education. So we met, of all places, there, and are now virtually connected.
Wow. Yep, and in, of course, COVID times, so we had to all take a rapid test before we came back to the States.
We did.
I think that conference was so unique because, first of all, we were envious of each other's panel facilitation skills. And then second of all, we both part of the media, and Elvin as well. And we when we say people put us as a podcast in the media, we're like, are we media? Like, is podcast media? I guess it is.
It is. It is. You can't shake that off so easily anymore. You're in, man.
I know, we're in. And so they put us in this media bug. And then we were lucky enough to meet you, find out that you cover higher education. You're writing all the time about trends in higher ed. And so I'm going to ask you about some of the the phenomenal articles that you've written. One of the as I went back and I researched you, and I'm like, okay, I've read some of these. I've read some of your work. Normally, right, just come across higher ed. It's pushed out in LinkedIn or wherever, and I come across it. And then I went to your profile on Forbes, and I see everything that you've written, and you're writing stuff. Every couple of days, it seems like you've got something out there. Every week, twice a week, sometimes. One of the
feels
ones
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the ones I found most interesting was the article that you wrote about 10 years in. 10 years in, we're still nowhere close to massive college closures. That's been one of the things, as you know very well, probably more than I even do, that was when coronavirus hit in particular. And even before that, there was just a lot of conjecture and prognostication around college closures, and it hasn't happened to the way Clayton Christensen predicted.
Hmm.
Why did you write about that? Was it because nobody was talking about it? Give me where it came from and what the article's
Sure.
about.
Yeah, happy to. And great question, I think. I've been following that because, well, frankly, because it got an awful lot of attention 7, 8 years ago when these predictions first sort of made their way into the public. A lot of articles written about it, a lot of people, a lot of pundits weighed in about sort of the future of higher education. And these predictions were put on the public record that I think Clayton Christensen had said half of all colleges would close within 10 years. A few years after that, he came out and said that his prediction was conservative. He expected way more than half. And he
Yikes.
hasn't been and yeah, and he hasn't been the only one to make those predictions. So I just have been following it because I remember thinking at the time that seemed not really reasonable as a prediction, and yet a lot of people just accepted it as fact that that was going to happen. And as you pointed out, it hasn't happened. Nowhere close to that. There's still a couple of years left on that prediction, so I could be completely wrong. To see in the next 2 or 3 years, 1,500 or 2,000 colleges close, I don't think that's going to happen. There's very little evidence to show that that could happen at this point. And as you mentioned too, I think wisely, when Corona hit, and I think all or almost all institutions of higher ed had to go remote, and saw enrollments decline and this and that, people said, oh, here it comes, this is going to be the trigger or the tripwire that's going to make all these prophecies come true. And that hasn't happened either. We have seen maybe a handful, maybe a dozen or so colleges close or merge. And I honestly think that's healthy. I think there shouldn't be any marketplace in which no one ever closes. That seems bad. So some attrition is good. And new colleges are starting. I just thought it's a very long answer to a short question. I just thought it was very important to keep sort of a finger on the pulse of that prediction to see how accurate it turned out to be.
Did you see anything come out about it after your article? Have you seen anybody else say anything about it, cover it, anything?
No, one of the co-authors, one of Clayton Christensen's co-authors, I wrote about this about 2 years ago, also when we got about halfway through, and then he wrote a piece. I think it was in Forbes, also, basically saying I was wrong, which was fun. But yeah, wrong. And then, but I haven't heard anybody take exception because the numbers are the numbers. You can just pull up how many colleges there are and how many colleges there were 2 years ago and 5 years ago and count them.
Most of the closures, as you noted in your article, are for-profit or were
Mhm.
for-profit institutions. And it's funny because I worked in for-profit education for 15 years. And
Mhm.
I remember those closures, the wave, because I was working in an
Sure.
institution where we taught out many of the for-profits were coming to us saying, hey, we're closing, can you teach our students? So there was a couple of year period where it was furious amounts of closures.
Mhm.
What happened in that time, which was really interesting, is all of those hundreds of thousands of students, so many of them went to nonprofits and publics as in transfers. So it boosted up a lot of the other sectors of education as you saw the for-profit shutdown.
Sure.
And to your point that you made in the article, there's been a lot of colleges that have opened. There's been college openings,
Mhm.
more to the tune of, I don't know, there were a couple hundred different colleges that have opened or rebranded or have spin-offs. And so that article I found really interesting and timely, and that especially in a pandemic, we're still not seeing those closures. Where do we go from here, do you think, in the closure, as you're doing your research, what do things look like?
Well, there are some very serious trends that are happening right now. I mean, I suspect you're going to see continued pressure on some institutions, but I think it's going to be regional. I think it's no surprise when you tell people that the Midwest portion of the country is seeing population declines. You also have this birth dearth that's as it's been named, this cliff that's coming in about 4 years, where there was a population decline, and those 18-year-olds don't exist. So there's
Yep.
going to be a national slump in available freshmen that's probably 2, 3 years on the horizon yet. And so I think some institutions in the Ohio and maybe parts of Pennsylvania, Michigan are really going to get squeezed as they deal with population decline and this lack of incoming freshmen. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see mergers or even some closures in those regions. On the other hand, places in the Sun Belt, sort of Arizona, Texas, parts of Florida, are continuing to see really, really stable growth, especially among Hispanic students. So it's just one area goes up, another one might slide back. But again, I think that's indicative of a healthy sort of marketplace, and I would be really worried if the things weren't changing at least a little bit.
Yeah, what's interesting about what you said, and I agree with you 1,000,000%, is as you see those declines in the 18-year-old freshmen, many institutions, because you could call it because coronavirus as a catalyst, have gone online. And they say one of the ways we're going to expand, one of the ways we're going to ensure our sustainability is to head into the online market. Well, you can't just do that. You can't just go, we're going to do online and magically you can recruit students, nationally or internationally. You have to know how to market. And I've said in my podcast many times that we were about a year ago said it's going to be an 18-month to 2-year bell curve, so to speak, because institutions are going to try to invest in marketing. Some will know how to do it and some won't. And it's that investment in online education, especially those trying to go into the adult market, that's going to really determine the future of those institutions. But they're going to try it for a couple of years. And then from there, you might see closures a couple of years after that. There's usually a slope, as it were. It's not usually abrupt as we saw in the for-profit sector. So the financial model is something that is being manipulated and tried and updated and innovated. What are you seeing on that front from your interviews when it comes to the financial model of higher education? Is it really antiquated in that universities just don't understand revenue streams, as it were? Or are we seeing more innovations?
Well, I think there's all of that is partly true, honestly. I mean, I think for 95% of colleges and universities and institutions, online isn't optional anymore. It's not
Right.
something that you could maybe do without. You just can't. The marketplace is too fluid, too dynamic, and too competitive to be an institution that doesn't offer online courses, even if it's just for increased flexibility for your local students. It's something that is so expected and so part of the normal offering now. Doing without it isn't a viable strategy, and a lot of it is marketing. And there are some universities who figured out that online programs are a huge revenue stream. Frankly, they wouldn't exist without their online programs, and they're probably names because they spend literally tens of millions of dollars every month on TV ads. They're not losing money. If you pull up the reports, they're making a fortune. You know, it is at some point a zero-sum game. There are only so many adults or so many returning learners or continuing learners who have the time and interest and capacity to go back to school online. And as long as the Arizona States and Southern New Hampshire universities and others, are soaking up so much of the market, it's difficult to compete there. But most of these universities, the other side of that coin is most of these universities are so on margin that 10 or 15 or 25 students really makes a difference. So they don't need 25,000. They need 250.
Right.
And and they'll get it, I think. And I think that's just part of the new competitive balance. So I don't know that it's about that they're bad budget managers. I think a lot of people misread the flexibility, for example, that boards and presidents have in university budgets. There are lots and lots of pots of money that they can delay or transfer or borrow against or put off. The tell for me usually is what we saw. I think it was this week, and I forget where it was. I should remember. A university, I want to say in Illinois or something, furloughed or laid off 100 full-time faculty. That's a bad sign. That's usually the last place that university presidents want to exercise their budget discretion. And if you're into that pot of money, the chances of recovery, at least in my experience, are slim. But I guess another long answer, and I'm sorry for going on, but
Well,
yeah,
this is what a podcast is. We get to go on as long as we want.
well, thank goodness for that. Right, I've been
Yeah.
cut off 3 times. The online isn't optional. It's an important mix. It's a survival mix for a lot of schools. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
One of the big takeaways for me from our time in Doha was, I put this on LinkedIn recently, and I get some spam from people that they don't like my posts. They tell me, but I had said that my one of my takeaways was that I felt like the international community, and I'm not talking about the entire international community. I'm talking about the people I intersected with at Doha,
Mm-hmm.
that were from the global community, valued higher education at a greater level than we do in the U.S. Right? There wasn't as much of the anti-intellectualism conversation around higher ed. It was, oh yes, we want every single person in our country to go through higher education. We want everybody to get a degree. We see it as foundational to our economy and to our way of life and our future of our country. And of course, in the U.S., we know, and you know, Derek, that there's a big question around the value of a higher education. What's the cost of a degree? It's the debt, the cost, and there's just a movement around. Hey, you don't gotta go. You don't have to go to college. You can get a job. You can go code. You can get a job making $100,000 a year. You could be Elon Musk if you want. What was your takeaway from the conference in that area, if you intersected with anyone or your takeaways from the sessions?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I did see your LinkedIn post. I think I voted on it. And it's a thing I'm really eager to talk about because I think what you found or what you articulated there is absolutely right. In the US specifically, and in a lot of probably Western countries, we take higher education so for granted in the quality of instruction and the quality of the institutions that we have now sort of doubled back on ourselves where we're starting to question it and criticize it and tear it apart and even publicly advocate that people not do it. Where if you look at probably 85% of the rest of the globe, they would kill, and in some cases are killing, to have half of the higher education infrastructure that we have here.
Just a chance.
Yeah,
just even
exactly.
A chance. Yeah.
Exactly. Our institutions are held in such reverence and esteem around the world, and are in such high demand. And we have sort of this luxury of scratching our head and saying, I don't know if a college education is worth it. I'm going to not do that. You're absolutely right. I find that bizarre. I find it just a head scratcher that there's such a global disconnect about our institutions here. If you've read my stuff, I'm very much in the yes, go to college, yes, finish camp. I don't certainly don't embrace and often don't even understand the arguments of do without college. And that's reinforced, to get to your point, when you do travel outside the country and you do talk to education people anywhere in the world, you get that reinforced that to them, a U.S. college education is of such value and such importance. And if they're trying right now, as you and I talk, people all over the world are trying to build institutions of higher learning based on American models. And I want them to succeed. And we seem too interested in picking them apart.
The vision of Unmuddle for the future is that the high cost, rigidity, and uncertain reward of pursuing higher education would be replaced with an economical, transparent, infinitely adjustable sequence of lifelong learning stints in which the employer, college, and learner are in constant communication about current needs, and the system can respond quickly to each. Employers need highly qualified and diverse talent to grow. Unmuddle is a marketplace that will help you with workforce and upskilling needs. To learn more, go to unmuddle.com/employers. You wrote an article, I think you called out the UK and Australia, maybe, where American colleges are kind of behind. They're the other countries, and I'm not talking about first world countries. I'm talking about, let's call them emerging countries that are looking at the question of value, what we question is value in the U.S. Our lack of innovation around the degree, time bound. We've got the 4-year bachelor's degree, general education. UK has 3-year degrees, and so on and so on. Who's catching up? Like, who have you seen that's looking at our mistakes, going, oh yeah, we're gonna innovate and capitalize on that, and catapult ourselves to the future?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one because, as came up at the WISE conference and has come up elsewhere. The degree, the bachelor's degree based on a 4-year, time in college is sort of the gold standard. It's that doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean it's right. If you and I had a blank piece of paper, we might design something differently.
Yeah.
But it translates. People know what it is because that's what our parents did. That's what their parents did. That's what we did. So we know what that is. And so in that sort of a concrete structure, innovation is very, very difficult. But I think you're seeing some institutions in the US, this one gets called out all the time, and rightly so, Western Governors University, for example, that has just sort of thrown out the timeline connection to a degree. And says if you can move through the course in 6 days, good for you. If it takes you 6 years, we're there to help you. I think that's a great model. I think there ought to be models that allow maximum flexibility, because not everybody's path is the same, not everybody's goal is the same, and so I just think it's not necessarily nationally based, but it's innovation based. And I hesitate calling higher education a marketplace, but it functions like one in a lot of ways, and the market will decide. The market will judge what innovations have value and staying power and which don't. And the one I point to all the time about that is, what is it, 12 years ago with the MOOCs. This was going to revolutionize everything, and it was going to change the way people learned, and it didn't. The market judged them MOOC alternatives as not a viable threat to the 4-year degree. And we'll see. I think there is need for flexibility, need for innovation, but will those things become serious alternatives? I think it's way too early to tell, and we just don't know.
What do you think about the 2U acquisition of edX? Right, because that's the what some would argue back with you and say, well, they are alternatives. You have a number of students who have taken classes, Coursera, Udacity, blah, 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 edX, and not entered the higher education market. Mm-hmm. But maybe they did enter. Did we track it? Do we know for sure? So then for $800 million, 2U goes out and they buy edX, and they start the free to degree hashtag, thinking that that's going to be their future pipeline, right? That's obviously going to boost up their pipeline. What do you think about that? Is that a move to legitimize the non-credentials, the non-credit space, or is that risky? What do you think?
Well, my first analysis is from a business perspective. 2U was really struggling with their stock valuation and their investors to return value on their investment before they made this acquisition. And I think part of that is driven by, as we mentioned a little bit ago, a becoming more and more limited pool of adult earners. Some economic pressures. 2U built their house on grad programs, online grad programs.
Yep.
And that's fine. But that market became saturated. And I think that this is a tangent, but it relates in. What I think it was UNC announced a couple of weeks ago that they were building their own online program,
regional-based online infrastructure.
Yep, and they're not going to pay an outside company to do that anymore. I think that is going to become more and more common, and I think these companies that provided that service are going to get more and more squeezed. So they had to go somewhere. Is it going to replace a traditional bachelor's program? Again, I'm skeptical, but we'll see. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding that a lot of people have in higher ed as to what the product is. You can say higher ed is about actually learning skills and information. And if that is what you think it is, then, there are multiple pathways. You can go to MOOCs, you can go to outside credential programs, you can even go to your public library and watch, TED Talks. There are multiple ways you can enrich yourself and learn skills and information. If you think that higher ed's what it sells is social sorting, cooling off periods for people to mature and learn how to be good citizens, then those options aren't going to fill that bucket for you. So it just depends on what the institution's real value is, what it's selling, and what people think they're buying from it. Again, if you're trying to learn, the newest software from Microsoft, going to Harvard is just a really bad idea.
Yeah.
It's just you're not gonna get that there. You're gonna way overpay and not get what you want and be lost. If you're trying to get McKinsey to hire you to be an analyst in Singapore, going to edX probably isn't your path. You're going to want to get a degree from Harvard, maybe two, if you can swing it. So they're just different products fundamentally.
So let me ask you this, because you said that the value of a college degree conversation is one that you like to have. When I was when we were in Doha, I was able to honored enough to host a panel with Francisco Marmolejo and some others, and we were talking about thank you. We were talking about the value of a college degree, and one of the things that came up was the non-credential space. It's the a certificate learning space that you're talking about. There's Google certificates who have, the one differentiator for Google is that it's a Google certificate, and they have billions of dollars of brand recognition behind them. And it's so much less so when, your friend, Jimmy, is offering real estate classes because he's trying to capture a market of people who are looking to upskill, right? There's no rhyme or reason or recognition around the non-credential space, which I think makes it, first of all, confusing and easy to sell unaware folks on the value of the non-credential, right? Of the certificate. You can get a certificate in, financial management 101 by a financial manager. I get them all the time. I don't know if you do on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, take my online course.
Yeah.
Everybody's got an online course. What is that doing to the noise around students? Do you think it's creating so much? Do you think that's adding to the anti-intellectualism movement? The value of a college degree decrease because everybody's going, oh, maybe I can do this, and is it get rich quick?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some social pressure and some messaging that is at best confusing, at worst downright destructive to all these things. You probably didn't see it, and I could find the article somewhere. Maybe 3 years ago, I went on one of these start your own online course websites. And I created an online course with a certificate, mind you, and a badge in phlebotomy, which of course is the art of drawing blood. I have no medical training. I've never done that in my life. I've never had any interest in doing that, but I have an online course teaching people how to do it with a certificate, which speaks to your point about how ridiculous some of these platforms are. And this gets back to sort of proving the model of higher ed, right? As you said, Google certificates work because they're Google, because people know what they are, they trust their brand.
And they have a hiring pipeline, of course.
Exactly. So this is what the difference between Harvard and Middle Tennessee State is. Not to pick on Middle Tennessee State, I just picked them at random. But, people know what Harvard is. They trust the brand. It has entree and cachet and reputation that other universities don't have, and that's the difference between my course in drawing blood and Google's certification in search engine optimization. One has value because of what it is and who it's from. The other much less so, maybe even none.
The EdUp experience, we like to have a little bit of fun. So I like to learn about my guest in a way that is a little unexpected, my friend Derek here.
All right.
So as a journalist, you're always the one asking the questions and getting answers from people, and probably some guarded answers sometimes because you're quoting them and putting them in a thing. So I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to quote you, and I'm going to put it all over social media. You ready for this question?
Sure.
This is for no money, Derek. We have no money at the EdUp.
No money.
But I want to know what your entrance music is. What is the song that plays when you get on stage to talk about your work, when you walk into your living room, when you walk into anywhere? What's the song that would be playing to introduce you?
Well, I would say it's Bittersweet Symphony. That's just happens to be like one of my favorite songs, or Welcome to the Jungle. And I know those are completely.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a little bit of a.
Yeah, completely polar opposites, perhaps. But I just like the energy of Welcome to the Jungle, and Bittersweet Symphony is perhaps my favorite pop song.
I love those choices, and I love. Why do you pick those? Is it related to your personality, to your work? What makes you pick those?
Yeah, one I think is just pump up music. the Welcome to the Jungle, and the other one I think is just it's poetic, and it has a lot of deep meaning for people who pay attention to it. So I like them for completely different reasons. If I were, because this happens to me every day when I walk into an amphitheater filled with 30,000 screaming fans, it's definitely Welcome to the Jungle. But if we're doing a
100%.
if we're doing a fireside chat, the other one is probably more appropriate.
Fire.
All right. See, I got buttons for everything, Derek.
Love your buttons, man.
So speaking of buttons, no, I'm not going to press your buttons, but I'm gonna just shift the conversation a little bit because we started, we hit on it a little bit, but there is the debt conversation around higher ed, and I think that's probably the basis for why the value becomes questioned. There's so many. This is one of the areas that I soapbox about because there's so many articles and people that talk about just the cost of college going up. And yes, it is going up in certain schools, and then in other schools it's not. You also have so many alternatives. You can go to community college. You can do 2 years of community college. You can then transfer to a state university or to a private university. You can cut costs if you know what you're doing. And I always go, who the heck are we talking about? We say, who? It feels like sometimes we're just not specific enough. What are your thoughts around that debt conversation?
I'm sure I'm in the minority, and I get hate mail pretty frequently.
Sorry, I didn't mean to identify myself when I sent it, Derek.
No, yeah, I know who it's from. I know my fans. No, that I think the student debt conversation is completely warped. Absent from the conversation, for example, is that 40% of all student debt, so not half, but a substantial chunk, is for graduate school. We sort of just lump, when we hear student debt, we think about somebody, getting their bachelor's degree. Well, a massive part of that is for people getting their master's or going to law school or medical school. And, it's unfair to sort of lump that in with the other. I think the average student debt too, when you pencil it out, we always hear stories of the person who has $130,000, $150,000, $200,000 of debt. Ouch. I think the average student loan is somewhere around $8,000 or $10,000, which is manageable for a lot of people, especially if you're actually getting your degree. Where I view it differently is for people who take loans and don't complete. They're getting the worst of the entire situation. They're getting debt and the inability to turn their education into increased earnings. That we probably ought to do something about, but it's tricky because you don't want to incentivize dropping out. So there are lots of push and pull rewards and penalties in this system, but I think treating it as one bucket, treating it as a national crisis is dramatically overstated. And I want to go back and highlight something you said. Yes, there are a lot of pathways to and through higher education that are essentially free right now if you know what you're doing. And when you take the numbers and aggregate, I've written about this a couple of times. The actual cost of going to college is pretty flat. The prices have skyrocketed, but the aid that the institutions are giving has also skyrocketed. On an average basis, a college education costs just about what it cost 20 years ago. We missed this sort of reality. And is that a healthy way to run a marketplace where prices triple but the discounts also triple? No, that's ridiculous. It's misleading.
It's marketing, actually. It's just a form of marketing, right?
Exactly. They raise the prices so they can make you feel special because they give you a huge discount. It's basically what car dealers have been doing since they were car dealerships. It's misleading and it confuses a bunch of people, but it is the system we have. And in a lot of ways, I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. And I guess what I would underscore is if you are motivated and are paying attention, as you said, there are lots of paths to higher education and through the system that don't require $100,000, $150,000 worth of student debt to get through. You can actually do it very, very inexpensively.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, I can understand where the hate mail comes from because all of what you talked about, it dissects arguments around college debt increases, around capacity of students to pay back, because there are so many numbers and those numbers can be manipulated if you look at certain segments and so on, and it's hard to understand fully what's happening. And to your point, yeah, the cost of college has gone up, but what students actually pay hasn't really changed that much,
right?
Because the average discount rate, I don't know where I saw it. It was iPads, maybe it was like 51% average
Mhm.
discount rate on it. And you're thinking to myself, so you're pricing it at 100K and giving it away, and and then actually charging 51,000 for it. That's a little bit of a difference. And then you get down to the smaller numbers where it's 30K and you're doing it at 15. It's just it is a game. It is
Mhm.
it's I've brought it up on the podcast many times. And I call it that. It is literally gaming the system.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's like having a closeout sale as a retail store, and you say 70% off. You just put the sign up 70% off, but you don't actually change the price. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? It's just the person comes in and your margin stays the same. It's crazy.
Yeah. And
But
these,
go
and
ahead.
you're paying attention too, I'm sure, the schools are, because you're in this field, the schools are getting a lot smarter too than they used to be. They're using really advanced analytics and AI and machine learning to game their costs and to game what they're willing to give out in aid and what they should set their tuition rate for each individual applicant. So it's no longer that the price actually means anything. The price is dependent on who you are and what you intend to study and what they think the market will bear for you individually. What a college says they charge in tuition, you ought to just shred it. It means nothing anymore.
Yeah, there's a couple of edtech companies out there. Tuition Fit is one that I know of. Mark Salisbury, he was a former guest, where he dissects all of that and shows what it actually costs a student
Mm-hmm.
to go to college. So there's resources out there, but you have to know that they exist, right? So
Sure.
there's a lot of ed tech companies that are doing really cool things, but they're small, or they're startups, or they're they're not like Guild Education that's at 3 billion or something. They're smaller and they're more
Mm-hmm.
niche. What are you seeing in the ed tech space? What are the innovations that you've written about, something that's caught your attention that you think can change the game?
That's a great question. I think I'm really sort of enamored with this company called, and I'm just going to name drop them, Concourse. And if you're not familiar with them, you ought to pull them up.
I do know them, yeah.
Yeah, they have, and I've spoken to the CEO a few times. They're on this mission to sort of flip the application model, where colleges apply to students instead of students apply to colleges, and I'm all for that. I think that is fantastic. And basically, it works that if you have to go through your high school guidance counselor to get set up, but you put all your verified information in, and then Concourse basically creates an anonymous profile with your stuff, and then the schools send you admissions. They say, hey, we will let you in. Here's what it will cost you. Here's the aid package. And so what happens if you get in the system is that you may have your heart set on, USC or Central Florida or something, and then all of a sudden you get admitted at 6 other schools you barely knew existed. And I just think that's really healthy. And I think it really sort of broadens the perspective of a lot of students and gets them to consider other options. And it also makes sense for the colleges. It makes sense for the burden of applying to schools. I really wish that would catch on more. And students, even if they wind up going to Central Florida, should at least check out other schools and other places and see what they have to offer without the fear of, boy, do I have the time to apply? Do I have the money for the application fee? Are they going to reject me? I just think it's a really good system.
It's funny because when you're talking about it, I immediately think of student athlete. If you're a blue
Mm-hmm.
chip recruit, you don't apply to colleges. They come to you and they
Yep.
say, hey, look, come here. So if you're an academic blue chip, if you're somebody who has tons of volunteer experience, if you're somebody that's got entrepreneurial aspirations, it would make sense in that model for the school to say, ooh, I like so-and-so. They started their own lemonade stand at 7 years
Yeah.
old and it blew up and they've got a business now. I want that student. I mean, that is a really interesting model. And I've come across Concourse before. They do great work. And, why shouldn't that be the way it is, right? That certainly would change the model, the recruiting model. Universities
Sure.
and scare them just a tad.
Yeah, and I'm for that. I mean, if you're, Harvard doesn't have anything to worry about, but if you're another school and you see that, 3 or 4 of the people who applied to you wound up taking other offers through Concourse or some other vehicle, maybe you want to pay attention to that. Maybe there's something in your offer, maybe there's something in your structure, maybe. And I would love to see, I don't know that it's ever going to completely flip, but I'd love to see that dynamic changed a little bit, where schools because they do, they do the college fairs and they send out the recruiting flyers and they advertise on social media and all that stuff. But the dynamic is still fundamentally come and, bow down before us and submit your credentials and we will decide if you're worthy. And I would like to see another pathway there.
Love it. So our final two questions, Derek, that we do, first of all, thank you for all the insights, but we ask of all of our guests the same two questions to close out each episode. What did we miss? What did we open mic for you? Anything you want to say, something that you cover, an article coming out, an event you're going to, anything that you could think of that you want to plug, just plug away. And then secondly, what do you see as the future of higher education?
Yeah, great questions. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, I spend a lot of time covering and writing about academic integrity and cheating and misconduct. And so I would be remiss if I didn't, on the open mic portion, just take 2 seconds to say we have an ongoing and systemic crisis in American higher ed with academic misconduct and cheating, and the companies that are making literally billions of dollars selling answers to students who, they're, for whatever reason, are paying them to not do their coursework. And I think it threatens the value of a degree, it threatens the value of a credential, and it really is frightening. My favorite statistic of that, since you've just given me the open platform, is that the 3 courses of study in which cheating is most common, so the 3 fields where students cheat regularly or most often, is business. So you might say, all right, that's fine. And the other 2 are engineering and nursing. And if that doesn't cause you to lose sleep, I don't know what to tell you. That we have nurses and engineers who cheated their way through their coursework is terrifying.
Yikes!
Yeah, yikes indeed. I'm all for that. And what was the second question?
What do you see as the future of higher education?
Oh, I think that it looks a lot like it looks now, frankly. And I realize there's some people who don't want to hear that, but I think the more that institutions innovate around the margins, online programs, flexible degrees, incorporating some credentials into their existing structures, are going to be fine. I think the players, the innovators, the investors, the entrepreneurs who are pressuring colleges are probably not going to replace them. They will see the colleges move a little bit, and their market positioning is so strong, and their position in the culture is so strong that probably we could have this conversation 10 years from now, and it'll look a lot like it looks right now.
I love it. Well, Derek, I encourage everybody to hit Forbes. You could just do a general search for Derek, and all his articles will come up. Derek Newton, he's a contributing writer at Forbes, covering higher ed and edtech, right? Primarily, or education in general?
Education in general, probably 70-80% of what I do is higher ed, but yeah.
Perfect. And there's so much meat in what you do and what you write about. I'm a fan. I would guess that a lot of times as a journalist, you don't get a lot of applause, but I'm going to give you one. Here it is. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Derek Newton. He's a contributing writer at Forbes, and he was my guest today on the EdUp Experience podcast. You've just EdUp'd. The vision of Unmuddle for the future is that the high cost, rigidity, and uncertain reward of pursuing higher education would be replaced with an economical, transparent, infinitely adjustable sequence of lifelong learning stints in which the employer, college, and learner are in constant communication about current needs, and the system can respond quickly to each. Employers need highly qualified and diverse talent to grow. Unmuddle is a marketplace that will help you with workforce and upskilling needs. To learn more, go to unmuddle.com/employers.